is Cristina Dozio, and her title is Popular Humor in Contemporary Egyptian Literature and Satirical Articles.
All right. So yes, the topic of my talk is popular humor in Egypt, and I want to give you a taste of this. So please imagine that we are in Cairo, but at the time of Saladin. And there are lots of people in the streets, and they're carrying a coffin at a funeral procession. But the man in the coffin is still alive. So suddenly, Karakush, the viceroy of Egypt, passes by, and the man in the coffin screams and shouts and appeals to Karakush. Karakush, Karakush, please save me. And Karakush answers, what? Do you want me to believe you and disbelieve the 100 of mourners walking behind you? So, I know this is not British humor, but the protagonist of this anecdote, Egyptian anecdote, is Karakush, who was the viceroy of Egypt at the times of Saladin. And from historical figure, he became a character in Egyptian folklore. He represents iron-fisted and arbitrary government, but also dim-witted justice. So actually there is an idiom about the Karakush, the dim-witted justice. And this is just an example of popular humor, which includes jokes, proverbs, ballads, but also dramatic sketches, satirical poems, and cartoons. Popular humor usually revolves around proverbial characters and circulates among ordinary people. We have witnessed how humor is produced and disseminated by people, for example, in the recent political uprisings in the Arab world. For example, Egypt's 2011 revolution was labeled, among other definitions, as the laughing revolution. And some of the jokes that circulated in those times were actually based on previous jokes. So in this talk, I'm not gonna explore the oral circulation of humor, but what happens when popular humor is revived in literature, in writings. And I have chosen two Egyptian authors, Khairi Shalabi and Bilal Fadl, and a selection of texts that pertain to two different genres, the novel and the articles. And newspaper articles. So my focus will be on characters, trying to see how these characters are presented in a new form, and more in general, I want to understand which function popular humor plays in the two genres. So this is Khairi Shalabi. What I can tell you about him is that he is known for the descriptions of the countryside and the urban underworld. He's known for an extensive use of Egyptian dialect, and also for the revival of storytelling and popular epic in his novels. The novel I'm gonna look at is the first one over here, رحلة الشاغل الحلواني. So the time travels of the man who sold pickles and sweets, that was published in 1983, so some decades ago. And as you can guess from the title, it is based on time traveling. It is an historical novel. The person who travels is Ibn Shalabi, so the same name of the author. And he's an ordinary Egyptian who travels from the present to different periods in the past. And obviously this strategy allows him to compare the two societies in a satirical way. The comic effect is also strengthened because there is a mixture of high and low registers. There are quotations from Mamluk historians, but there is also Egyptian dialect. The second author is this journalist, Bilal Fadl, who has worked for independent Egyptian newspapers or privately owned newspapers. He's also a screenwriter. And in this collection of essays, Enrico De Angelis says that he's one of the critical voices that didn't align to the main narration after 2013, so after the army's intervention in Egypt. And actually, this journalist now lives in the United States, so he doesn't live in Egypt anymore. The interesting thing about Fadl is that he has published collections of his columns and collections of short stories. So he, as other Egyptian satirical journalists, has also been active in the editorial world, so in publishing books that are usually labeled as adab sahir, so satirical literature. And these books can be just simply collections of columns or more elaborated stories. So to represent this double nature of his work, I have chosen two texts in this case. So the first one is purely a newspaper column. It is entitled Darda Shamagi Nebe Kumanda, and it was published in 2013. So practically, it is a political commentary column, but it uses a fictional device that is the imagined letter. So the journalist pretends to write a letter to General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So obviously, in this letter, the journalist is critical towards the general, and the strategy of the letter implies that there are other fictional elements in this column. So there are all the political figures of current affairs. I mean, all the political figures of that times become a sort of characters. So they acquire a fictional dimension. The general himself, the Muslim Brotherhood, Muhammad al-Baradei become kind of characters. And this article is written in Egyptian Arabic because the author wants to express his ideas very directly and emotionally. The second text by Bilal Fadl is taken from one of the collections that I mentioned, one of the books published in 2009, and it is a short story called Silah al-Mukawama, the weapons of resistance. In this case, the text is written in standard Arabic with Egyptian Arabic used in dialogues. So we have three different texts pertaining to three different moments, and I'm aware that there are differences in this corpus. So the authors pertain to different generations, and there is obviously a different reception of novels and satirical writing in the literary sphere. So despite these differences, I must go through this session quite quickly, but you have to believe me that the two authors use similar strategies, narrative strategies and rhetorical strategies to make their audience laugh and to convey satire. So one of the strategies is definitely the journey and the juxtaposition of anecdotes. So both Ibn Shalabi and Bilal Fadl have live various episodes, funny episodes, misunderstandings. So each of them is an anecdote that reminds us of previous of the cultural heritage, let's say. Another strategy is playing with the figure of the wise fool that speaks the truth. And both authors are interested in what is authentically Egyptian. So they present themselves, or their narrator, as Asli, so Asli Masri, so genuinely Egyptian. For example, obviously the narrator of the time travels is called Ibn Shalabi, so he is an ordinary man, and the other Egyptians are called Banu Shalabi. So obviously he's one of them. And Bilal Fadl has published a collection of columns that is called As-Sukan al-Asliyin li Masr. So once again, the genuine people of Egypt. So both authors present themselves as part of the group, part of the Egyptian people, but at the same time they are social observers, so they can make fun of what is typically Egyptian, and also of the relationship between Egyptian people and the rulers. I will just read quickly this quotation from Shalabi. We sons of Shalabi, of the Egyptian branch, laugh and distract ourselves with jokes, even as the good heels of our oppressors grind us down. Then, when the bad times are over, we weep, as if our love for good company were stronger than the need for revenge. So this was a passage from Shalaby to give you a taste of his style. And this is an example of the column Dardasha to give you an idea of how many rhetorical figures both authors used. They mainly use repetition, assonance, and also lists of words. But this was just an introduction, because actually we have to look at the characters that they revive in the three selected texts. So Shalaby revives Karakush, that was the protagonist of the first anecdote, and he plays with the double nature of Karakush because the narrator meets him as a historical figure, known for his cruelty, but treats him as a comedy character. I will let you see how. He plays on the verb to see, because to see means meeting somebody, meeting a real person, and also watch somebody on stage, in movies. So Ibn Shalaby has this conversation with one of the victims of Karakush. The victim says, "What do you mean? You've never seen him before?" "Just once." "Where?" "At the Rihani Theater." So the narrator inserts Rihani Theater, that is something contemporary, in a story that is set in the past. So this obviously creates a misunderstanding, a displacement, and it's funny. And he uses this also with Karakush himself. So Ibn Shalaby here is talking to Karakush and approaches him very directly. "How's it going? Long time no see. It seems like forever since I saw them play you at the Rihani Theater." And moreover, as you can understand, Rihani Theater is also a way of evoking the history of Egyptian comedy, because Rihani was one of the most famous playwrights. And it is also a way of mapping Cairo, because Rihani Theater was in the entertainment quarter, so in downtown. So it has a number of implications. And the following step is that Ibn Shalaby explains to Karakush how popular humor can strip a ruler of his power. And the explanation is here. Ibn Shalaby explains to Karakush that Egyptian people will make you a character in books and plays and movies, just to make sure no one tries to follow your example. Hearing this little speech, the eunuch, Karakush, looked as if he were going to faint. Okay, so practically, we start with a victim fearing Karakush, and we end with Karakush being frightened. In Bilal Fadl, the elements of popular humor that are mentioned are different. He mainly mentions satirical poets, Ammiya poets, so another branch of humor and criticism and satire. So in his column, Dardasha, he mentions Ibn Arus. So he quotes literally his lines. "Finally, as our good friend Ibn Arus said, it is inevitable that on a given day, grievances will be redressed." So this is a quotation. And Ibn Arus was a Zajal poet, but he was also popular with Egyptians because his lines became popular ballads. So the journalist chooses this poet because he knows that his readers will know him. And he does the same with other colloquial poets. For example, sometimes he mentions Abdurrahman al-Abnudi. And in another case, he mentions Salah Jahin. This happens in the third text, the short story. And as it is a short story, Bilal Fadl doesn't just mention the lines, doesn't just mention the verses, but he uses Salah Jahin as a kind of character. So practically, the title of the story, if you remember, was The Weapons of Resistance. And Salah Jahin is often connected to resistance. Okay. So
that's a conclusion.
Yeah,
possible.
sure. Yeah, this is almost conclusion. Let's say practically what happens is that the protagonist of the short story is inspired by Salah Jahin and by his lesson of resisting injustice, but the situation that he lives doesn't allow him to perform a real political resistance. So he interprets the lesson of Salah Jahin with irony. For example, he says Salah Jahin's voice was louder than the noise of the elevator engine, which you can understand is ironical. So my conclusion is that Khairi Shalabi mainly plays with the character of Karakush to juxtapose historical narration with popular counter-narration, and this is part of a broader project. I told you he revised folklore in his novels. Instead, Bilal Fadl first mentions poets and then uses them as characters because mentioning critical voices from the past makes the critique on the present more biting, especially when opposition seems hard or ineffective. So this is my conclusion on the two strategies, and I would be glad if you could help me in defining which satirical texts are actually suitable for a literary analysis, because that was the main problem I faced when preparing the talk. Thank you. Thank you.